Hello and welcome to this new series where we're going to have a look at submissions to the Dungeon Crawler Game Jam of April 2022. And now you might be wondering what's a Dungeon Crawler and what's a Game Jam, and I will give you a brief overview about both of these terms and a little bit about the background information about Dungeon Crawlers and some other terms you might come across and which might be useful to know in the rest of this series. So first up, what's a Game Jam? A Game Jam is basically a kind of convention where people get together either in the real world or in the digital world and then create a game together, or not together as a big group, but as multiple teams or individuals. They have a limited amount of time to do that. And of course this amount of time is known beforehand, so you might have just one day, or you might have 1 week, 1 month, or something like that. And you have a fixed rule set, and the rule set might be announced at the very start of the jam, which means that you can't really prepare for it, and you have to be very spontaneous, and oftentimes you also form the groups on site, for example, if it's a physical gathering. But it might also be that the rules are already announced beforehand and you can prepare a bit, though of course you should make the majority of the game during this time period. But the rule set and the circumstances depend a bit on each individual game jam. In this case, in case of the Dungeon Crawler Game Jam, the rule set was known beforehand already, which was just to create a dungeon crawler according to the definition of dungeoncrawlers.org, and I will go into that a little bit later. The time frame was also already known before, which was 1 week. So, and the teams which came together, it was basically pre-made teams already, so there isn't a whole lot of people grouping up, but you usually either do a game on your own, or you also already have some friends, or so you work together with to create this project. Regarding the term dungeon crawlers, if you played any RPG in the 80s or 90s on PC or home computer, it's very likely that you came across series like the Might and Magic games, the Realms of Arcania games, which are actually based on a German pen and paper system called Das Schwarze Auge, or the Dungeons and Dragon based games, which are the Gold Box games, but also the Eye of the Beholder series. And of course you might know the Wizardry games and the Bard's Tale games. And these two ones were especially important because they kind of were the big series which lay the foundation of the genre. And one thing they all have in common is the step-based movement system. So you are basically moving on a grid, and this is also why they are also called gridders. You're moving on a grid and you do a step one at a time. So you cannot move forward in a continuous movement. You might have an animation between those steps, but you cannot stop your movement in between two tiles. So you always, like if you have a grid of 1 meter squares, you always move 1 square forward. You can turn to left 90 degrees, right 90 degrees, and of course you can continue in that direction, but you cannot, for example, turn 45 degrees and move diagonally. And you do all that from a first-person perspective. Now in the Realms of Arcania games, for example, you're traveling on a map, and this is okay, but the core gameplay exploration part has to be in a first-person perspective and with this kind of movement system. These games can be turn-based, like the first ones, like the Wizardry titles, but they can also be real-time, have real-time combat, like the Dungeon Master games, and then of course the Eye of the Beholder games. If you're playing one character or multiple characters doesn't really make a difference in terms of this terminology. However, you might also come across the term blobber, and blobber refers to having a whole party you're controlling from the first-person perspective. So for example, Might and Magic, the first 5 titles, they are all blobbers and gridders because you're moving on a grid, and they're also considered dungeon crawlers. But From Might and Magic 6 to 9, for example, they are still blobbers because you're moving around with the whole party, but they are not considered gridders anymore because you're not moving on a grid. The same is true for Wizardry 8 and of course the Realms of Kenya 3, where you can not move on a grid anymore and just have free movement. There are some games like the Realms of Arcania 2 and the Ravenloft games, where you can switch in between a free movement and a grid movement, and of course these are fine if the grid movement is actually playable. And with that, we will get back into the more of the dungeon crawler jam surrounding, and I will tell you a little bit more about that. And here we are on the webpage of dungeoncrawlers.org, the organizer of this dungeon crawler game jam, and this is a great resource for everything concerning dungeon crawlers. Yes. So, of course, on the main page you find something regarding the news about new dungeon crawler mods, new releases and so on. Yes, there's not a whole lot going on in this genre, but if there is, you will find it on this page. But you will also find a Facebook group with even more, well, constant news, because there's a little bit of here and there, and if someone finds that, he will post that on the Facebook group, so that's also a great resource. Check out the Facebook group, and you can see it on here in the web page, but also in the video description. There's also a Discord server, which is also a great community to exchange your ideas, or maybe you are looking for some new game to play and want to ask for experiences and so on. So this is also a great place for that, but it's also a great place for developers if you want to exchange ideas, or if you need to get help for some specific, I don't know, movement patterns, the camera isn't showing, whatever you intend to, and so on. So if you're a developer, this is also a great place. There are a couple of other indie developers in there, so yeah, definitely check that out if you're interested. You can also find a definition of what's a dungeon crawler in here, and if you agree with that definition, it might also make your life a whole lot easier to find new games you're interested in, because if you look on Steam, for example, for dungeon crawlers, you might find all kind of games, but not the ones you expected, because the term dungeon crawlers has been bloated quite a bit during the years, and every game with a dungeon is basically calling itself a dungeon crawler. But if you go by this old school definition, and as it's mentioned here, the definition is the subjective opinion of dungeoncrawlers.org and may not correlate with other people's idea of a dungeon crawler, but it's pretty much my idea of a dungeon crawler as well. And if you agree to that, you might also want to go to the games list, and here you'll find all kinds of dungeon crawlers which have been released since, well, forever. So, for example, if you want to find a really old dungeon crawler from 1980, you can find, well, let's say Wizardry, the first Wizardry game, or 3D Monster Maze. Yeah? So this was like how the first dungeon crawlers looked like. Well, maybe it's not the best representation, but for example, also the more recent releases, you might want to know, okay, which dungeon crawlers have been released during the recent years, and you can't find anything on Steam. That's a great resource to find these. So Vaporum Lockdown, for example, okay, there's a nice looking dungeon crawler in here, and you can find maybe some videos, some screenshots, further links, and so on. So this webpage is a great resource for everything concerning dungeon crawlers, dungeoncrawlers.org. And then next up to the entries for the dungeon crawler game jam. So this is all on a webpage called itch.io. And this page is often used for hosting dungeon crawler jams, or not a dungeon crawler, just dungeon crawler jams, but all kind of game jams. And yeah, you can find all the entries here. There are in total 41 entries, but I'm going to test 42 games, unless some of these games are not working, because there was one game which didn't quite make it into the dungeon crawler jam, but which was kind of written by the biggest part of that game was made during that time frame, and it should have been in there, but it didn't make it in time and so on. So I will check out this one as well. So 41 games, or 42 games. I will make one episode per game, and I will play each of these games as long as I think it makes sense. So, but I will give each game at least 10-15 minutes unless I finish the game already in less time. So let's say if a game is just 8 minutes long and you've seen everything, then I will not continue playing for more than 8 minutes. But if a game, let's say if a game looks really boring, then I will not just stop it after 5 minutes, but I will give it a realistic chance and play it for a little bit longer, at least 10-15 minutes, to have seen what the game actually wants to offer. But if the game is rather, well, big, or if there are multiple mechanics to find out, and if I got some high motivation to look further into the game, I might also play it for a couple of hours, and this will all be within one episode. So you can see in the playlist how long these episodes are. These are all just this one entry each. So again, I recommend to check out the playlist in the video description for all these entries. And as soon as I played these games, I will also add them to the playlist. For these games, I will just randomly click on, well, actually random is a good keyword, because I will check them out kind of randomly. So you can see, you can sort them by the most popular, most rated, and so on. I will not do that, because otherwise we would basically either start with the best games or best rated games and then get worse and worse games during the time, which isn't really what I want to do. And I also don't want to start with the worst game or worst rated game and then get better games later on, and by that having lost all of you by all the not so great entries in the jam. So I will try to do it a little bit random. However, I can say that the first few games I will put into the playlist, I will check out. These are ones which are somewhat more substantial and worth showing, so that I get a nice start into that, and then I will mix it a bit. Yeah. So I already recorded a couple of games, but I will mix it in a way that it makes it more interesting. I will not do that completely randomly, but it's a little bit random, and I will not go straight from worst to best or anything like that. Now I will quickly click into one of these titles, Legend of 9 Puzzles. That's not the game I will check out first, but just some general information here. So you can find the ratings here, and I basically ignore the ratings because I want to go into the game with a fresh mind, so I never look at these. Then you can go to the itch.io page of that game. Some games you can play directly in a browser, like this one, and others you can download. They are all for free, so don't worry about that. Sometimes you're asked for if you want to donate anything, but you don't have to. So you can download them all for free. I will read the description here. I will tell who created the game. And then we will look into the game, of course, but we will always look into the latest version of the game. So if usually, of course, the time is was rather limited for the Game Jam, so 7 days, but the game might be really unfinished. Maybe there were some bad bugs in the game which was submitted to be rated, and I will not necessarily not play the game which has been sent to the Dungeon Crawler Game Jam rating, but I will always play the latest release which is available at the point of, well, recording it. So this might mean that this is not super representative to the ratings it already received before, but I think it makes it a better well, presentation of what's possible and what people have designed, well, still in a limited amount of time most of the time. So be aware of that. So that was the introduction and pilot episode for this series where we're checking out the submissions to the Dungeon Crawler Game Jam of April 2022. And I hope that I've been able to give you a decent overview about what to expect and some explanation about the terms. And well, if you're still having some questions, then don't hesitate to ask them down in the comment section and I will try to answer them. You can find further links in the video description, for example, where you can download the games and where you can find the Discord server. But of course, you will also find the playlist there with all the different entries. The first entry will be this pilot episode, so you might want to skip that. The list will be updated. Well, once I play these games, I will add the videos as soon as possible. It might be right away, but it might also take a few days. If you don't want to wait that long, you can also subscribe to this channel to see that right away. And with that, I hope to see you in these upcoming videos. Thank you for watching and happy crawling. Bye bye. And these are, I guess, my action points, and in theory I could use 3. So goo is a sticky, steamy acid and partially sentient. Okay. Oh. Attack. Skeleton dashes and misses. You attack skeleton. It's a skeleton. No, I don't want to be healed. I want to die. I want to crush myself. My most inner feelings. Oh shit, we got healed again. Bear takes damage. Now we do 3 damage. I'm not sure why we are healed up to 9. Very interesting character design.